Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and today we have another round of class tuning incoming that is going to go live on the next weekly reset. So, as we continue to closely follow gameplay data and player feedback, we will soon make several tuning adjustments to classes that are over and underperforming in group content as well as PvP. The following are changes that'll come with the weekly reset. Guardian Druid. Absorb granted by Ursoc's Fury reduced to 45% from 50% of damage dealt. This was previously 60%. It got nerfed to 50%, and now is nerfed to 45 after this. Not a huge nerf. Eventually, as this number gets smaller, it does start to become more and more of a real nerf, but still not a huge nerf to Guardian. And then Innate Resolve's bonus to Frenzied Regen has been reduced as well. That's this talent here that gives you extra healing on your Frenzied Regen based on your missing health. Now, I think at 120, it's still going to be close to a Lay on Hands at medium and low healths, but this may also be a good angle to target nerfs on this class. I'm still not convinced that this is the right... The more that I've played Guardian, the more... And this may be the wrong way to nerf this class, but I think the right way to do it is to target... Blood Frenzy for M+, which gives you Rage when your Thrash does damage. And I think the big problem with Guardian is that in M+, you often have, like, there are some really big pulls, and Guardian is actually tankier on those pulls than it is on smaller or medium-sized pulls because it's generating so much free Rage from this talent. So I think if I was balancing Guardian, I would be looking at capping the number of targets that Blood Frenzy will work on to like 5, and then maybe half value on the next 5, and then nothing on any past the 10th target. Something like that so that they don't just have infinite Iron Furs and infinite Rage in AoE situations, because that's also OP with After the Wildfire and with Ursoc's Guidance. So I think that's how I would be targeting Guardian, but these are more real nerfs than the last round of nerfs. I think probably still the best tank for M+, and good targets to not make it too much worse in Raid, where I don't think it needs much nerfs. Demon Hunter. Neither I-Beam nor Feldev will be interrupted by School Lockout effects, which I wonder if this means they won't be interrupted by Quaking. If so, I think that's really nice, because the amount of times that I've gotten interrupted on my I-Beams and Feldevs to Quaking is very, very obnoxious. Although maybe it's just the school lockout, so maybe if you get locked on Chaos or something on one of your other casts, you can still... I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what this means for that, but I think that would be a good change. I think that'd be a fair change, especially because you can't cancel these abilities by pressing A or D, right, and strafing, because you still have like 1% move speed during them. Mage, they've changed Invis, so it'll no longer cancel inconsistently, but it will now end when you start a cast rather than when you end a cast, to be consistent with other Invis effects. Fair enough, I think. Fire Mage nerfs, 6% on Flame Strike, 8% on Flame Patch, Incendiary Flames now procs every 10 seconds from 8, and Conflag damage has been reduced. So this is a good way of targeting fires AoE only rather than the single target, which is probably fine on that spec, especially the Raid single target. I think this is a good set of nerfs. Gonna maybe increase the amount of times in M+ where the Fire Mage will be doing single target combust, but I think probably not going to change too much there. And this spec wasn't too far ahead of the other really good DPS options, like Enhancement Shamans, Destruction Warlocks, those sorts of specs that also do a bunch of damage. So this might be enough to dislodge them out of that God comp, but I'm still skeptical. Mistweaver. Ancient Teachings now transfers 150% of damage done, but not in PvP. That change isn't applying there. Nice, I like that. Yu'lon's Grace now stacks up to 15% and 3 per second, like that. Chikakun's healing increased by 100%, I like that. And Enveloping Breath's healing has been decreased by 12%. So shifting more of Celestial Harmony's throughput into Chikakun with the intent of keeping the talent's power level similar in Raid and increased in dungeon content. I mean, I like this sort of movement. I like moving more healing for most healers into single target and skill-based buttons rather than the kind of buttons where you just kind of smash them and it heals the whole raid for a bunch. So I like this movement here for them, and I hope that this accounts to be an overall buff. I think it probably does, but I'm not super familiar with the HPS breakdown for Mistweaver. Holy Paladin. All damage decreased by 10%. Blessing of Summer now causes attacks to deal 25 or 20% as Holy. Was 25%, which I think was previously 30% as well. So they're further nerfing Holy's damage. Holy Paladin damage output has been higher than we would like, considering their toolkit as a whole. I think fair here. Sin Rogue. All ability damage increased by 5% and auto attack damage increased by 5%. Okay, finally, there's spec that certainly has been in need of some buffs. It's nice to see it showing up here. 5% blanket, I guess, is probably a good start. I'm not sure if it's enough, but a good start. Prot Warrior, D-stance reduction to damage dealt reduced to 5% from 10%. So this is a buff that, even though you see the word reduced here, because your damage is going to be reduced by less in defensive stance. They've already recently buffed defensive stances damage reduction on incoming damage, and now they're making defensive stance less punishing. So it's actually it's going to be a very good trade-off to be basically perma in defensive stance once this change goes through. I mean, it's very small damage loss now and a huge defensiveness increase. So if you're playing a Prot Warrior, even with the old values of D-stance, I recommended for new players to basically sit in D-stance until you were comfortable. Now I think it's just sit in D-stance unless you really need to go into battle stance to do extra damage or something in some really, really hard content. But I think perma D-stance is probably incentivized by this. I'm not sure I like that. I kind of liked that there was more of a pro and con to it, and now it seems like the balance of trade-offs behind going into D-stance has shifted really far in the favor of pressing defensive stance. Stellar Reflection's damage reduction has been increased to 20%, or 25% from 20, and Vanguard's increase to stamina has been increased to 20 or 35% from 30. So more Prot Warrior buffs to their health pool and to their magic DR, which, yeah, that's a nice way to target that spec as well. So a good set of changes here. Bunch of PvP changes as well, and no other changes such as nerfing the difficulty of dungeons or nerfing any dungeon mechanics or anything like that. So thoughts and opinions. I think the buffs and nerfs they've delivered here are good. I think that back in like Shadowlands, especially in BFA, we would often be one of the things that the community as a whole pretty frequently requested was like, hey, we would really like it if these big balance changes you did that like nuked specs would stop happening and would stop just destroying specs. And we would like it if there was instead smaller nerfs that came out more frequently. That is sort of what they're doing here. It's tough because the Guardian nerfs have all been very small each of the weeks. Like this is the largest nerf to Guardian, I think. Although honestly, maybe it's tied with that first one. The one more recent one was even less of a nerf than this one. So maybe when a spec is as good as Guardian Fire have been, maybe more moderate nerfs instead of just very small ones would be appropriate earlier on. But you know, the majority of weeks since 10.1.5 have come out, Guardian Druid, Fire Mage, and Holy Paladin have gotten nerfed. I don't think Shadow Priest necessarily needs nerfs as a spec. I think they need to address that through the mechanics that make especially Mass Dispel, but also Mind Soothe as mandatory in dungeons. And then Augmentation is its own can of worms, which is obviously a lot harder to easily resolve without potentially compromising the identity of the spec. So leaving that alone, just the other specs in the like Exodia M+ comp, I feel like they've been making good moves on them, but it's tough now because if we look at the title this season, there's a extremely new phenomenon here. After the title went up by, so let's just take a look from 10.1.5 to now. The title went up by over 100 points in the first week of 10.1.5 in NA, then 75 points. Then there was the first round of class balance, then it went up by 26 points and 20 points. Then there was the more recent round of class balance, and it's gone up by 7 points last week. And then it's actually gone down so far this week, and same in EU, because more characters have been created, and that increase in number of characters in the title range has actually lowered the score more than people have pushed it up. And I think that's a problem with, you know, you're nerfing a comp 3 out of 6 weeks or something, that each of these specs is getting nerfed in the comp, the level of keys that can be done, it's not necessarily like any given group. Like, yeah, you could just play a lot better and go higher. But the fact that in order to time the same key, you now need to play moderately better, and in order to time a higher key, you now need to play a lot better, isn't a particularly good feeling. So I really think that they should, in addition to doing continued small balance changes, that I think, yes, should include Guardian nerfs. Ideally, they would include more buffs to some other specs as well, but there are some buffs coming into specs that can use them here. Obviously, there are people in the comments already that have typed out their why is my spec not included in this list yet. But if you look over the past 6 weeks, there's been like 10, 12 different specs that have gotten buffed. And I think that it's not likely that they're going to do that much more than that. In terms of the buff side of things, I would like to see a few more buffs to a few more of the underperformers, though, yes. But I also think what they should be doing, in addition to targeted nerfs of the parts of dungeons that make Shadow Priest OP, which is the like dragons and halls of infusion and what it feels like if you don't have master spell for that, last boss of old demand, what it feels like if you don't have master spell for that, those sorts of things. I think they should do a blanket health and damage nerf to the dungeons, because if you're playing the god comp, it's harder now than it was a couple of weeks ago to do keys. And if you're playing any other comp, it's even harder than the god comp is having it. Obviously, like, your relative difficulty hasn't gone up over the past couple of weeks, which is maybe fine, but you didn't get that 3 keystone level power spike at the start of 10.1.5 that now 1 or 2 of those keystone levels has been taken away, and god comp is still left ahead of you, right? So I think that a blanket nerf to dungeons would be a really appropriate way to avoid this season. And this, the title is an easy way to track this, but I believe this holds true at lower key levels as well, where it feels like if you were using these comps, if you were pushing, 22s or whatever, they've gotten harder rather than easier. And so I think that dungeon nerfs would be warranted. That's what I would propose. Aside from that, I am happy to see frequent small changes. I think this is a good way to approach this. Obviously, would have been ideal to not have Holy Paladin and Guardian Druid and Fire Mage launch in the state that they did in 10.1.5, but the game is going to make mistakes in both directions with specs, and especially if they're updating frequently, I think that's something that's going to happen. So what's important is they have a good way of balancing it after the fact, and I do think that adjustments of this size at this frequency is pretty good. I think it is pretty good, provided it's paired with. I do think that you want to pair it with something to stop the title cohort being locked in, and the effects in lower keys as well, being analogous to that as well. And I say this as somebody who personally, I would really like it if they don't do that. For me personally, I don't have to do any more keys unless they nerf the dungeons. If they nerf the dungeons, I got to go back in there, because I'm at 3,500 right now. So that score is very safe if they don't nerf the dungeons. Depending on how much they do, I wouldn't be safe, but I still think they should. For the health of the M plus season, especially if it's going to be another 2 or 3 months left in this season. Other option, just start a new season. This is a radical idea I've proposed before, but literally just call it, be like, okay, yeah, the season's going to end on 10.1.7, and we're going to have a month and a half or however long until 10.2 of like a mini season, and that season's we're going to do some new dungeons, and we'll return an old favorite seasonal affix like Encrypted or Awakened or something like that, and we'll do a little mini season. We'll pair some more tuning, especially like buffing some of the specs that saw very low representation this season, and we'll let people go wild and kind of revitalize the M plus side of things for a while, because I do feel like M plus, at least the mid to high end of it, is going to be rather dead until or unless they decide to change that. So that's my thoughts. Curious to know what you think in the comments below. Do try to be civil. Do try to not be too negative towards towards, I don't know, me, Blizzard, or your fellow commenters down there. People have mostly been good, but these sorts of topics often lead to a lot of hostility, and I think that it's better for everybody if we keep that to a minimum as much as we can. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.